Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third installment of our Homelands History series. Again, I'm Heather Briegel, Director of Cultural Affairs for the Stockbridge Muncie community. Today, I am joined, usually we've had Nathan, our TIPO, on here with us, but today we have Bonnie Hartley, who is our Historic Preservation Manager, who will introduce our speaker. But first, I want to let you know, if you have any questions during this presentation, please put them in the comments below. I will monitor our social media as we are doing this presentation and filter questions to Bonnie and to our speaker. So anything you have to say, comments or questions, please put them down below. I will now turn this over to Bonnie and hope you guys enjoy today's lecture. Thanks so much. Take it away, Bonnie.
All right, thanks, Heather. Okay, Kolomosi, everybody, and greetings to our community and to welcome to all of our guests that are joining today. I'm Bonnie Hartley. I'm a member of the Stockbridge Muncie community, and I serve as our Tribal Historic Preservation Manager. This office, we work on repatriation and protection of our sites, and we're based within our traditional territory in today's Williamstown, Massachusetts. Today, I'm very happy to share with you the latest in our series of Homelands History Talks, coordinated by the Historic Preservation Program out here in our Eastern Homelands and part of our Cultural Affairs Department in Wisconsin. I'd also like to acknowledge with appreciation our Historic Preservation Committee. And we're pleased to offer these presentations free of charge to our community, and for guests joining that are able, we're going to be putting the donation link into the comments. Your support really does make a difference, and we appreciate it. Anishik. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Callie Kosk. Hi, Callie. Thank you for sharing with us today. I was able to meet Callie a few years ago when she came out east and she was conducting her PhD research. Then the research brought her out east here. And Callie, we're just fortunate that you've continued on with that research now and being a professor, and that your focus continues to be heavily on Stockbridge Muncie Mohican history, and specifically that of our women. It's just really wonderful that we have you as a resource. I want to go ahead and share a background introduction of Callie. So Callie Kosk is currently the Assistant Professor of History at Oklahoma State University, where she specializes in 19th century Native North America, with a special emphasis on the experiences and contributions of Indigenous women. She recently published an article in American Indian Quarterly about Stockbridge Muncie Mohican women and Indian education in early America. She's currently working on a book manuscript that examines the lives of Stockbridge women during their era of removals from the 1780s to the 1850s. So again, we're really grateful that you are leading another generation of academic scholarship about our history through the research that you're doing and through the students that you're teaching. Today, we all get to be fortunate enough to be your students with you as well, and to learn and celebrate the accomplishments of some of our really dynamic Mohican women who are ancestors to many in our community, such as Lydia Quinney and Kaknasqua or Mary Dockstader. So Callie's talk is focused on one specific time frame within our history, Stockbridge Muncie's time in New Stockbridge, New York. So Callie and I were thinking that it might be helpful just to share, especially for so many guests that might be joining from outside the community, just to help orient to this time frame within Stockbridge Muncie history. So I'm going to just share my screen and share a recap of our many trails, so just so we can help understand with what Callie's presenting. So Stockbridge Muncie Mohican history originates from our name. The Mahicanatuck is the waters are never still, and our community is named the Mahicaniuc, which became known as Mohican. It comes from the people of the waters are never still. So we're the people from all along this waterway. And so as you can kind of see, just a general orientation of Mohican territory and then our closely related kin, Muncie, together, we're now both Mohican and Muncie people. And so this is our traditional homeland. And then what Callie is presenting on is within one part of our many trails of removals and as well as returns. throughout history how we've been forced from those original homelands multiple times, and have ended up where we are today in Wisconsin. Again, emphasizing though that we've always returned and our ancestors have always come back to our homelands to protect sacred sites and try to engage in land claims throughout our indigenous territory. But for today, the focus is specifically this kind of more narrow time period between around the 1780s to around 1820 or so in New Stockbridge, New York. So again, not everybody, moved all at once as one, only one move and everyone didn't leave at the same time. But in general, we're looking at around a 40-year time span within New Stockbridge, New York. And this was following our time in the Stockbridge, Massachusetts mission era, when our community was forced to, again, remove from those lands. We moved west among the Oneida Nation in a place where we then called it New Stockbridge, New York, referring to where we had just come from in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which Stockbridge is just the name of a town in England, but then it became a place-based name in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and we kind of carried that on ever since, and it's sort of become part of our identity. So we're looking at just this one part of our history. So just to kind of make people aware of that's the time period that we're talking about. So, as part of this really, fragile time of removals and, trying to secure a land base, this is the time that Callie's presenting about, and specifically about women. And we know that today we've recovered our tradition of having women in leadership positions, such as today, our council women. But women throughout our many trails have always retained leadership roles, even in the face of colonization. So it took a severe blow especially during the Stockbridge mission era. But I think it's interesting, as we'll hear from Callie, how in the New Stockbridge, New York era, how quickly the leadership role of women, still shone through really strongly and was revitalized. So with that kind of orientation in mind of the time period that we're talking about, I wanted to turn over to Callie then. If you could please share your screen, Callie, and we will eagerly be inspired together with your talk about Mohican women in New Stockbridge, New York. Anishik.
All right, thank you so much, Bonnie. Can everybody see my screen okay now? I believe everything looks good. Okay, thank you so much, Bonnie, for that introduction and for the invitation to join you today for this Homeland History series. It's a real honor to get to share the research that I've been working on with the broader community, so I'm very thankful for that opportunity. I'm joining you today from the homelands of the Kiowa, Kickapoo, Quapaw, and Osage nations in north central Oklahoma. But I'd like to begin by talking about the land that the Stockbridge Munsee made their home from the 1780s to the 1820s. The tract of land that was given to them by their Oneida kin was about 6 miles square. So you can see it here on the map, the New Stockbridge Reserve, just south of the main Oneida settlement. To their north were the nations of Oneida and a smaller community of Tuscarora. To their east was the Brothertown community that had also been recently displaced from southern New England. And to their west, the Onondaga Nation. Oneida Creek, which ran through the center of the tract, offered a powerful enough current to be able to power a new saw and grist mill. When Stockbridge Mohicans left Stockbridge, Massachusetts, they had to leave behind a lot of existing infrastructure, including a church, mills, and many, many homes. So rebuilding the community from scratch was always going to be a very arduous and costly endeavor, but they set to work on that process right away when they got to New York. Our story today really opens in 1796. And by 1796, either side of the Oneida Creek that ran through New Stockbridge, New York, had already been populated by frame houses and wigwams. The new church meeting house had recently been built, along with a new saw and grist mill. Those had also been recently completed. And at this point in time, the Stockbridge were finally starting to get settled in this new location, and they were starting to look for new opportunities and better opportunities for their children, especially their girls. And this is where the Quinney sisters come into the picture. The Quinney sisters were the daughters of Joseph Quinney, who was a head sachem, as well as the deacon of the church and a school teacher, and his wife, Catherine Quinney. So the subjects of our talk today are going to be the Quinney sisters here, including Catherine Solomon, Eve Liberty, Elizabeth Joseph, Jane Quinney, and Lydia Hendrick, who was married to the main Stockbridge sachem, Hendrick Upplemut. And all of those women's daughters and nieces, including Margaret Matosquo, Elizabeth Mamonsquo, Cognosquo, also known as Mary Peters Doxeter, who will figure prominently in this story, and Marjorie Upplemut, and not to mention one of their younger cousins, who many tribal members already know about, and is a very famous woman in Wisconsin for being the very first public school teacher, and that is Electa Quinney. So throughout 1796 and 1797, these Quinney sisters began a letter writing campaign to the wives of Quaker missionaries who lived in New York City and Philadelphia. So why did they do that? Well, in order to understand why they start this letter writing campaign to Quaker women, we have to kind of understand how they grew up and the context in which they grew up. These women came of age during the American Revolution, and they started families and started having children during that subsequent displacement when they were forced out of their lands in Western Massachusetts and had to settle in Oneida Territory. In Stockbridge, Massachusetts, missionaries really neglected the education of Indian girls. And this was a trend broadly in the colonial era. These particular women were able to read and write in the English language, likely because their father was who he was. He was the school teacher. But most women and girls in the tribe at this point in time did not have the ability to read and write in the English language. And that posed a particular problem during the American Revolution when men had to leave to go to war and fought alongside the Continental Army in that war effort. Many of them died. And so a lot of them did not return. And what that meant was that a lot of women were sort of left during this period of time to defend their land against white encroachment during the Revolution and to try to petition the Massachusetts state government as well as the Continental Army for money to pay for their husbands, brothers, fathers' service in the Revolution that had not yet been paid. So this left women and girls in a particularly bad situation during and immediately after the Revolution. To add to all of these problems, cloth was very hard to come by in this era, largely because of non-importation from the American Revolution and the boycott of the colonies of imported cloth. But even after the Revolution, cloth retained a really high price on the market. So it became one of the most difficult things to come by. And so the community had a hard time keeping its members clothed adequately, particularly during the winter time. So as the Quinney sisters are thinking about the future generations and how to set themselves and their community up for prosperity, they're thinking about these hardships that they have just endured and that they're continuing to endure in New York. And they're thinking about the fact that their children, all their children, but their daughters in particular, need to be able to have academic skills, and they need to be able to learn how to spin and weave and sew in order to produce cloth and clothing for the community. So they really wanted their daughters to be better positioned to defend the community, to defend their land, and to sustain their community in New York. So this brings us to the letter writing campaign that the Stockbridge women started with Quaker women. And the reason why they start writing these letters to Quaker women is because they were quite impressed with Quaker men. Quaker men had first started to make engagements with the Stockbridge community in the summer of 1796. And at that time, they were looking to start missions among all different Native groups in upstate New York. But they developed this connection with the Stockbridge, particularly after the Quakers did something very surprising, which was they actually delivered on some of their promises that they had made to the community at the beginning of the summer. So they arrived in June and promised to bring a lot of very needed supplies to the community by the end of the summer. When those supplies actually arrived in July, the community was surprised and impressed that a missionary group actually did what they said they were going to do, and provided them with some needed supplies. And it was at this point that Lydia Upplemut, also known as Lydia Hendrick or Lydia Quinney, wrote the first letter to a woman named Margaret Elliott, who was a prominent member, or whose husband was a prominent member of the New York Indian Committee for the Quakers. And after that letter, Margaret Elliott wrote back to Lydia, and the rest of Lydia's sisters started writing to other Quaker women, and other members of the Stockbridge community were also writing letters to Quakers, and some in the Brothertown community started writing letters to Quakers as well. So after more than a year of correspondence and kind of developing this relationship with Quaker women and 2 separate visits from male Quaker missionaries, Stockbridge women asked for some of their daughters to be educated in Quaker homes for a length of time in order to receive academic training, as well as training in spinning and weaving. They asked the Quaker women that you would teach our daughters as you teach your daughters. And Quakers in particular had a reputation of teaching young women to a greater degree than other groups. Girls received within the Quaker tradition much more of a high level of education than girls outside of the Quaker tradition. This letter that I have here on the screen is one of the few original letters that I was able to find. And a lot of these letters are coming from the Quaker and Special Collections at Haverford College. This is one of the few originals. Most of the letters that I found were actually copies, handwritten copies from one of the Quaker missionaries, Henry Simmons. But I was able to find this original and compare it to the copies and find that the copies were very faithful representations of the original letters. And in this particular letter, this is written by Elizabeth Joseph, who was Lydia's sister. Elizabeth was the mother of Mary Dockstader. And in this letter, she's actually writing to one of the male missionaries, Henry Simmons. And in it, she's explaining to him that Mary is prepared to go and live in Quaker homes, but she is nervous, and she keeps asking Elizabeth if Elizabeth is quiet on her mind about Mary leaving to go live so far away. The girls were going to live with Quaker families down in Philadelphia, which was about a 2-week journey. And Elizabeth reassures her daughter that yes, she is quiet on her mind, that this is important work that needs to be done. And then she further gives consent for Henry Simmons to inoculate Mary whenever she gets to Philadelphia. Epidemic disease was a really big problem in early America for everyone, but in particular, Indigenous communities were very concerned, especially about smallpox epidemics. And so in this letter, Elizabeth says that it is okay to go ahead and inoculate Mary in hopes that she will not contract one of these diseases when she goes and lives in this area that is highly concentrated by American settlers. The trip that the girls took, and there were 4 Stockbridge girls and 2 Tuscarora girls that took this initial trip. And the trip, like I mentioned, took about 2 weeks. They left from New Stockbridge. They went down the Mohawk River, through Albany, down the Hudson River, through New York City, across New Jersey, and into Philadelphia. And they did this in the winter time. So it was a pretty treacherous journey. But this was an important journey too. And it wasn't just about receiving an education, as important as that was. This was also about developing kinship ties with the Quakers and fostering diplomacy with other groups. What you're going to see in this period as well is while Stockbridge girls are there in Philadelphia, some of those families actually send their daughters up to New Stockbridge to work with the missionaries there. So there is this exchange that's going on throughout this period. The women and girls who really started this set into motion this period of growing prosperity in New Stockbridge, as well as the preservation of Mohican culture and values and the continuation of female leadership. All of these girls helped usher in this period of prosperity that we're going to be talking about, but one in particular was really central to these efforts, and that was Mary Peters Dockstader, also known as Koknosquo. Mary was the youngest of the girls to go live with the Quakers. She was only 8 years old at the time when she left, and the letters between her and her mother are really touching. They show a lot of the heartache that was inherent in being separated from one another, but they also show the resolve that was there in Mary's mother and in Mary herself. There is a sense in these letters, and this is one of the letters from Elizabeth Joseph to Mary Peters, where she updates her on what's going on with the family, and she reminds her to keep her resolve and to keep her faith, and that this is important work that she's doing, not just for herself, but for the entire community. And you get the sense from Mary's letters, even as a young girl and a preteen, that she knows that what she's doing is important, and she knows that this is about something even bigger than herself. Mary did return about 4 years later. So she spent 4 years away from her family and her community. She returned 4 years later in about 1801. When she returned, she was bringing back with her all of this new education and skills that she had acquired from the Quakers. But she then stopped wearing the Anglo-style dress that she was asked to wear when she was with the Quakers. And she returned to her Mohican-style dress of the mantle, the skirt, and the leggings, and then continued on with her Mohican education as well, learning about their historic roles as diplomats, their history, language, and craft works, which we're going to be talking about more here in just a minute. But upon her return, within just a few years, so keeping in mind she's still a teenager at this point in time, she got involved in helping to run the local grammar schools for the children, as well as opening up her own spinning school, spinning and weaving school. Now, these images that I have here are not from the Stockbridge community, but they are representative of what the spinning wheels and the looms would have looked like, and some of the cloth that would have looked like that these women were producing at this point in time. The spinning school that Mary opened received much attention within and beyond the community and from missionaries all over the country. By 1817, there were more than 60 women and girls working in the spinning school. And in that same year, they produced over 410 yards of cloth, both flannel and flax cloth. And they produced at least 30 cover lids, which, if you're not familiar with what cover lids are, those are essentially like bedspreads. These materials they used for the nation as a whole to clothe the community, and they also sold these materials as well at a profit. And one thing that's important to note about this endeavor was that this was actually not a capitalist endeavor. They were using these tools that were kind of given to them and that they purchased and acquired, that they were sort of tools that colonizers were using, but at the same time, they were using or employing communal values with this, because when they sold these products, women were not paid individually for whatever they produced. Everything was sort of held in common, and any of the profits that were made from this were distributed equally among all of the women. And of course, a lot of the materials were going just to clothe the nation in general. And I just want to sort of put this image in your mind of how much work this was. The community was growing the flax that was used that then had to be harvested and then put through the spinning wheel to be made into thread, the thread put in the loom into the cloth, and the cloth into either being sold as raw material or being made into other garments. So they did this with flax, and they also did this with sheep. So sheep raising was also something that was going on within the community. And that wool was used again to turn into thread to then weave into textiles. So this is a lot of work and a lot of labor that's going on here. What Mary also did was she helped open up schools like this among both the Oneida and the Onondaga. And the Onondaga school she did entirely at her own expense without the help of any other missionary societies. So she's, maintaining these ties, not just with the Quakers, not just opening up educational opportunities for children in her community, but also in those surrounding communities that constituted their larger kin networks. And she's also in this period going to be setting up this new generation of Stockbridge girls to help maintain these ties with Quakers, to be learning these skills as well. And those included her own daughters in the late 18 teens, as well as her younger cousin, Electa Quinney, who went to go live with a Quaker family on Long Island for a time to do the same kind of apprenticeship that she did with Quaker families earlier in her life. So outside of textile manufacturing, though, what else were women doing? Well, the answer to that is a lot and everything. They were acting as diplomats. They were acting as carriers of Mohican knowledge. And their extensive travel is really notable. I think a lot of people tend to not really think about Indigenous women as being travelers, prolific travelers and writers. But that's absolutely what Stockbridge women were doing in this period. They were traveling annually, obviously back home to their homelands along the Housatonic River to meet with relations there. But they were also traveling to New York City and Philadelphia to maintain those ties with the Quaker Indian committees there. Catherine Solomon, who was the wife of Solomon Quaquamut, she traveled with her husband on many occasions. And while he met with Quaker men, she would meet with Quaker women. And she developed a reputation and became well known in Quaker circles because of these travels that she underwent with her husband. So they're continuing this diplomatic tradition that, again, not only the men were engaging in, but the women were engaging in as well, this connection to their homelands and these sort of larger travels. The other thing that women are doing in this period is they're traveling back home to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, but also to places like Ballston Springs and Saratoga Springs that were very big tourist areas. And they were selling a lot of craft works as another way to support the community. So I want to take a look at some of these pictures here that we have. These are all Mohican craft works from the New York State Museum's ethnology collection. And I'll draw your attention first to the images on the left. We have a pair of moccasins as well as a pair of beaded leggings. These items probably would not have actually been sold on the marketplace. These would have been produced for members of the community and worn by members of the community. But they're absolutely items that women would have been creating. The beaded purse in the middle would have been an item that could have been actually owned and used by a member of the tribe, but purses like this could have also been sold at these markets as well. And the beadwork here is really emblematic of a lot of the visual traditions that were very common in Mohican craftworks, including the crosses that you see at the top of the bag, as well as the heart-shaped patterns. They're very signature of Stockbridge Mohican style. And over here on the right, I'll draw your attention to the corn husk doll here in the top. This corn husk doll would have been used by Mohican girls and sold at market as well. And the dress that this corn husk doll is wearing was is representative of what Stockbridge women's dress would have looked like in that era, which is the mantle with the beaded leggings and the beaded skirt. And dolls like this were likely carried with the girls when they went to go live with Quaker homes as sort of a memento from home. And then finally, the basketry in the bottom right-hand corner here. This basket weave is very representative of the Stockbridge style, as well as both the black and white stamping, that color pattern, excuse me, not black and white, the black and red color pattern is also very representative of the Stockbridge Mohican style. But these baskets are also a great piece of evidence to show how Stockbridge people are continuing to change and evolve and adapt and draw new inspiration from communities around them. The potato stamp pattern that you can kind of see here on this basket is probably drawn from the Oneida tradition. These particular potato stamp designs were more representative of the way the Oneida people stamped their baskets. So through a lot of these craft works, you see a continuation of Mohican stylistic trends, but also the incorporation of stylistic trends of kin groups that they were now living much closer to than they had before. And the making and selling of craft works, of course, served the function of supporting the community financially. But it also served a really important function of sustaining these skills and these traditions. And it also served the function of language preservation as well. As these women are coming together to make these items, whether it was just within their own individual families or in their in sort of their broader family network in the community, they're going to be speaking the Mohican language as they're putting these items together, as they're creating them together. And we know that language preservation continued on in this period because women actually held weekly meetings that were held exclusively in the Mohican language. And a lot of those were run by Lydia Quinney Hendrick. And the church services every Sunday were also still held in both the English language and the Mohican language. So it's very clear to me from the record that the continuation of the Mohican language was strong in this period, and likely something that the women were intentionally wanting to preserve, even as they're wanting their children to become very well versed in reading and writing in the English language. But let me return to Mary for just a moment. Despite all of the success that they were finding in New Stockbridge, New York, the state of New York was determined to remove Indian nations. And in 1820, around 1820, 1821, Mary started to serve as a land agent and an attorney for the tribe to the state of New York to represent them when in land deals in Albany with the state government. Mary even actually made a personal appeal in a letter to the Lieutenant Governor of New York, asking him to stop the sale of Stockbridge land. And in the letter, she explains what had been achieved in New Stockbridge. And she says, if we're removed at this point, it's going to be very hard to renew what we've created here. If we're forced to remove once again into a new place, you know, again, keeping in mind all that infrastructure that they had built in Massachusetts, started completely over from scratch, were rebuilding it in New Stockbridge, New York, and now they were facing another removal. And so she was trying to appeal to the Lieutenant Governor to please stop this process. It unfortunately did not work. But she did end up playing a very active role in assisting John W. Quinney and other Stockbridge headmen in these negotiations with the state of New York to try to get a better price for their land as the nation slowly started to move into Wisconsin. And I sort of skipped over the attempted settlement at White River, which we can maybe talk about a little bit more in the questions and answers if you have questions about it. But essentially what's happening here in the 1820s is community members are slowly removing to Wisconsin. And as they do, they're signing over their land to Mary, who is then kind of becoming the executor of those estates and trying to get the best price that she can for those lands and then transferring that money back to communities or to the families that had already removed to Wisconsin. And so Mary really stayed behind while everybody else was sort of leaving the area. And she played a really important role in helping people prepare to leave. As they sold their houses and their land, some of them would come to Mary and end up living with her in her home for a while before they finally made that trek out to Wisconsin. But she ended up staying behind. And unfortunately, she did not make it to Wisconsin. And this is where we'll close the story for today. We'll close with the nation's arrival in Wisconsin. Mary did not make it to Wisconsin because she died sometime in 1828. And we don't know exactly what the causes were, but she was only in her early 30s. But her children, as well as her aunts and many of her cousins, did make the trek to Wisconsin and arrived there. And what we see in Wisconsin is, especially in Electa Quinney and in these subsequent generations of Stockbridge women, we see this legacy of this commitment to educating girls and educating all children. So that is where we'll wrap up the story today. And I am looking forward to getting to any of your questions and comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Callie. We do have a lot of questions, so I'm going to start going through them. Thank you to everyone who's already posted them, and please continue to post them, and we'll go through as many as we can. So, Callie, the first question that came up was about New Stockbridge, New York today, and what kind of existing evidence there might still be if we wanted to identify any of the places that you spoke about. Like, so for example, are there any existing buildings that you know of or structures that still exist, or archaeologically? And I know from my work in historic preservation, we've talked about that a little bit about, you know, where we could try to identify these sites, but do you have any thoughts on that you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to be kind of the expert, I think, on the answer to this question. But as far as I know, I don't know that any of the structures that were built by the nation are still standing in that area.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah, that's what I understand so far too. One of the things I'd really like to do that I have not done yet is to actually go to that area and just get a sense of the space a little bit and try to figure out exactly where everything was. I think we do know where the burial grounds were there. It's on a particular piece of private land. But other than that, I don't know that there's a lot of physical evidence of the community that still remains, other than Bonnie and I were back and forth about some headstones of Hendrik Opelmuth and Lydia's sons, Solomon and Abner. They both died there in New Stockbridge, so they did not make it to Wisconsin. And they're buried there in that burial ground, and their headstones are still, they're not there on the actual burial site, but they're in, I think, one of the historical society kind of archives there.
Yeah, they're separated from the burial ground. Yeah, so I guess from what I understand too, same thing. I don't know of any buildings that still exist, but for our work today, we actively consult on archaeological projects there. So if there's a new construction that's planned in New Stockbridge, we, you know, hone in on the area that we know of from, you know, our time in New Stockbridge, and we would consult on any projects there. And there have been, you know, archaeological, you know, findings there. So, and for NAGPRA as well, for if there's any ancestors, you know, burials that possibly are from that time period in that location, we consult on. But I think that is, in terms of research base, that is something that I'd like to continue to try to, you know, get funding and support to do, would be to, especially for something like the spinning school that you're speaking about, or, you know, something if we have idea from the maps of where that is. So that's something that we could, you know, try to coordinate research projects. But yes, we don't know of a existing, you know, buildings to see now. Okay, another question was about, I guess, kind of how you started with talking about the Stockbridge Mohican girls and interacting with the Quakers. And I guess just sort of a question along the lines of, you know, pointing out where we had just come from the Stockbridge mission in Massachusetts, that being a different religion, being the minister there being Calvinist. So how, I guess, just any thoughts you have on that transition then of, within a year or so, then we have our Mohican girls then working with the Quakers. And so your thoughts on maybe what that's like, or is there a particular reason then why we're reaching out to Quakers at that time as opposed to other religious groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I've thought so much about in my research because there is this really big difference. There were plenty of wives of missionaries that Stockbridge women could have reached out to. Obviously, John Sargent, his wife, notoriously, though, I think refused to live near New Stockbridge, New York for a long time. She was not committed to the mission. She was not a pleasant person. But his daughters, John Sargent's daughters, came with him, and they were invited to some of the women's weekly meetings as well. But I think it really says something that Stockbridge women, did not reach out to Congregational women, did not reach out to Baptist women or Methodist women. They reached out to the Quaker women. And I think that's because they had a lot of conversations, private conversations, one-on-one with the Quaker men when they came in that summer of 1796. And they asked about their wives. And I'm sure that they had heard about Quaker women because for generations, probably these Stockbridge women's mothers and grandmothers had probably encountered Quaker women at earlier council fires, because Quaker women would sometimes be at council fires in the colonial period. So they're probably familiar with the fact that Quaker women play a very different role in Quaker society than, say, Congregational women played in sort of Anglo-congregational societies. And I think one of the things that I argue in my dissertation when I'm working on for my book manuscript is I think they saw a similarity and a kinship with Quaker women and Quakers in general in a way that they didn't see with other missionary societies. And part of that also had to do with the fact that the Quakers did not conversion to their particular brand of religion was not a prerequisite to receiving any sort of aid or friendship. And I think that was an important part of it too. They didn't say, "Oh, we'll help you, but you have to convert first, or you have to stop wearing these clothes, or you have to stop believing these things." It was just, no, we believe in this assistance, and so here it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it also kind of just signifies a little bit that women, or that our community as a whole, maybe we're going with what is available, what's the most advantageous, and so we're not necessarily, from our Stockbridge missionary experience, only working with that, within that religion. We're trying to keep the community together and survive. Okay, another question is, I think there's a couple questions related to the beautiful objects of our community that you shared from the New York State Museum. And so one question was about the ribbon work moccasins, the collection date and information. So while you were talking, I tried to go back and pull that up. And for that question, I didn't see, I couldn't immediately find any information about the date from the collection. It just is described as saying it's a pair of deerskin moccasins with ribbon applique flaps used by Mohican Indians of Rensselaer County, Algonquian Mohican. And it doesn't say the date or from whom the State Museum bought them from. So I guess if we are able to get that answered, which I just put a question out to the State Museum on that. So if we get that, we'll drop that in the comments.
Bonnie, if I can just really quick, Gwen from the New York State Museum actually commented on that question in the comments. So
thank you.
I just wanted to say that. So
hello, Gwen.
I will back out and you can keep going.
Awesome.
Okay. And then the other question on the objects that you showed were just to see a zoom in on the basket. So I have a picture of that. I'm just going to pull up really quickly.
Perfect.
So yeah, there's a close-up of the basket where you can see more of the motifs on the stamping a little bit better. Zoom in a little further.
Yeah, the New York State Museum did a beautiful job photographing these. And these photographs I used in the article that was just published in American Indian Quarterly. And so these are featured in that journal that was just released, I believe, in November.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. So, okay, then another question is back to your description about the weekly meetings that were being held with Lydia Quinney. And if you could just tell us more about that, there's interest in that, and kind of the purpose of those weekly meetings, what kind of community responsibilities did the women have, what was discussed at the meetings, just anything more that give us a better understanding of what was happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the weekly meetings were almost always held on Thursdays. It was Thursday afternoons, and the women would gather together, and there was a religious component to it too. There was usually an opening with a prayer and some religious dialogue. And it seems like, I don't have, say, a transcript from the meeting, but from the descriptions of the meetings, it sounds like this was also a time for community planning. And to discuss, well, I guess community planning kind of falls into that umbrella as well. I got the sense from a lot of the records, especially from the 1790s when the Quakers were there visiting, I got the sense that the women were using these meetings to kind of talk and game plan about, like, okay, what do you think about these guys? Like, what's going on? What should we do next? And there were also, I should note too, that there were women from other nations in the area who would sometimes come to these meetings as well. So I know that there were Oneida women and Tuscarora women and Brothertown women who would sometimes come in for the meetings. And so it was not just Stockbridge women, it was really this broader network of women in the entire area, kind of meeting, sharing religion together, strategizing community survival. And then women really took up, I think, the mantle of education. It seems like they were consulted a lot on educational matters. They really took the lead on a lot of these educational issues in this period. And the thing that I didn't mention in the presentation was that they also started a female scent society in, I think it was also 1817 was a very busy year. It was 1817 or 1818. And they started this female scent society, which was essentially kind of like a reform society. The whole idea behind it, though, was to raise funds to support educational efforts, as well as to help combat all sorts of problems that were going on the reservation with taverns trying to get alcohol into the community and things like that. So that was started and lasted for at least a few years there in New Stockbridge. And I'm still trying to find out if that society was reestablished in Wisconsin or not. So stay tuned on that.
Okay. And I just realized too, with the questions on just a moment ago about the items, I wanted to mention for repatriation, I think the interest in seeing those is always then, can we bring those back home to our museum? So I just wanted to share that for those are items that, of course, we would love to be able to repatriate. For the most part, though, they tend to be very difficult to be able to fit into the categories that we are legally, able to under the law for the NAGPRA repatriation law. So we can repatriate items that are ancestral remains related to burials, ceremonial objects, or items of cultural patrimony, which at times something like a basket, or if we can show that something like your talk today, is very much, part of a community enterprise, like the spinning school or something, like if there's a strong case to be made for it being communally significant, it's cultural patrimony, that's possible. But it's usually very difficult for items like what was shown, with the beautiful, the purse or the moccasins, things like that. So just to mention that those are items that we would love to work on, but it's kind of why we're not, we don't have them in hand. Okay, so another question, I guess, kind of one that I had was related to, you shared about many different roles of women, in this time period of, when you're showing the different travels and how, we shouldn't think about just our women only staying, within the confines of New Stockbridge, that we were, everywhere at that time and very dynamic in different roles. So talk about the traveling, writing, spinning school, but I think if you could share a little bit more about the stateswoman role, perhaps. So especially with Mary Dockstader, and I know we had talked about, how she continued out, like her uncle is our famous H.M. Hendrik Oppemuth, but that she herself, also played a key role as a stateswoman. And I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit more discussion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It seemed to me from the materials and the letters that I was reading that she might have been kind of groomed for this role at kind of a young age. I mean, just I think simply having gone to live with the Quaker families says a lot right there. But in one of the letters that she wrote soon after she got back from New Stockbridge, she wrote a letter to a young woman named Hannah Jackson, who was one of the Quaker girls who ended up going up to New Stockbridge to stay for a while with the Quaker missionaries there. She wrote back to Hannah Jackson and was explaining things that were going on in her community. And she talks about her uncles, Hendrik and Solomon, going on these missions to, honestly, at that point in time, they're helping the federal government. They're also trying to act as these sort of intermediaries between the federal government and tribes to the west. So she knows about all of that and what's going on at the time she's 12 and 13 years old. And then as she gets older, she's also traveling, and I'd have to go back to my notes to get the exact number of times, but I mean, I've got at least solid records of 4 or 5 times in her life that she's going to New York City and she's going to Philadelphia. And in this process, she's meeting with Quakers to kind of negotiate and talk about how they can get more Stockbridge girls to live in Quaker homes, to be educated there. And one of the things that's interesting about this story, I think, too, is how Quaker women are using this relationship to kind of position themselves in a more prominent place within their communities as well. One of the reasons why Quaker women are able to get on to the Indian committees within the Quaker Church is because of this relationship that the Stockbridge women cultivate with them. So they're sort of helping each other in a way, and you've just got so many Stockbridge women who are making these treks, who are maintaining these ties, and sort of maintaining these kinship ties are so central to diplomacy. And I think it's just important to note that women are playing these roles and doing these things too, because it tends to be that the men get kind of all the credit for doing this.
Right.
And we know so much about Hendrik Oppemuth for good reason, right? But to know that his wife and his sisters-in-law are all doing these things too, I think really, really says something.
I'm glad that you're doing this work that helps bring her more into the picture. And I know we were talking about how she didn't always agree, didn't agree with Hendrik Oppemuth's decision or his advocacy to move our tribe to White River, that she spoke out against that. I mean, so she is in the historical record, comes across as, having her own mind and speaking up, with what she thinks is best for women in the community. And I think with some of the examples you gave of the enterprises that were started, I mean, you could see why would you want to uproot again and, start over?
Absolutely.
All right, so we just have a couple minutes left. So I wanted to do a couple quick questions I think we can do quickly are, who are Mary's descendants? I don't remember if you had that on your, the chart that you had, or if you, know and would be able to share.
Her direct descendants, hold on, let me move this here. Let me pull the screen back up so you can see.
And while you're looking for that, maybe I'll just field another one. There's a question of were there many people who stayed behind in New Stockbridge? What became of them? I mean, no, there weren't many people who stayed behind. I don't know of our tribal members that stayed behind. We know that there's a lot of intermarriage with Oneida Nation, so it's possible perhaps that some people may have stayed there. We know, for example, of Oneida tribal members that intermarried with us, at that time and continued on with us. And a question of most Mohicans convert to Christianity. I mean, from our time in Stockbridge, according just to the baptismal records, then I would say that's a fair statement that majority did convert there. Okay, so we've got Mary's descendants.
I actually, they're not on this particular family tree. And I should note too, this is a very limited family tree. This is not all of the children of these women and their brothers. This is just sort of the ones we were talking about here. I don't have it handy. If anyone has
Okay.
that question, and if anyone has any follow-up questions at all, you are more than welcome to email me and I will give you whatever I have. But Mary did have some descendants. She had, I believe, 3 children. One of them was named Phoebe, I believe, and I'm forgetting the names of the other 2 children. She had, I believe, a son and 2 daughters. But yeah, I don't have the sort of extended family tree nailed down for Mary Dockstader yet, but I can send along to anyone who wants to know. I can send along any information that I have for sure.
Okay. And then we had a question that also, I'm not sure if you have handy or would be willing to put in the comments, but about further reading and, if you think if there's any particular good sources to suggest on this topic of women in New Stockbridge and also just our time in New Stockbridge in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I put together a sort of short select bibliography on the primaries in case anybody wants to actually go through and do that. The easiest way to get access to the letters that I'm referring to that the women were writing is through, and I can drop this. I'm not sure, you'll have to advise me what's best to drop it in the comments here on the Facebook page or to find another way to get it to you. But if you Google search Pinn's Treaty plus Haverford College, you'll be able to see this big digitization project. And it has a lot of these letters and a lot of this material about the Mohican Nation is available actually online right now. Anybody can go see it. And you can sort of search there for particular names. So if you really search Stockbridge, it should pull up all of the different resources for the Stockbridge. But yes, I also have a little list here that I believe Heather just mentioned that you can email and we'll get that list out to whoever is interested in that.
Okay, yeah, and I do have that. I remember that you sent it, so I can we can go ahead and post all those in the comments below this video. All right, and I will also put your email address on there as well then if there's other questions.
Absolutely.
And for today, we're at our time. So we would again like to say Anishik, thank you so much, Callie. We really appreciate all your work and dedicated research to our community and for sharing with us today. Again, we thank everyone for joining and gratefully accept any donations. And we would love to see you on another topic on the power of Native women that Heather Bruegel will be presenting on March 29th. So hope to have people come back for that as well. So take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.